Good morning. So I want to talk about my favorite game of all time, the 1980 D&D basic set, Moldvay, including the expert set. I want to talk about the chemistry of that game, the chemistry of D&D, the chemistry of Moldvay edition basic Dungeons and Dragons, and why. Because this is looking at, again, why rules is written for me generally. Because when we homebrew, when we tweak, when we cherry pick, when we disregard rules or we throw rules out, we fuck with the chemistry of its intent, the chemistry of its design. And I'm just going to talk, really, I'm going to make this point with something as simple as why experience and treasure have to be available as written, because those are the things that impact something as simple as hirelings, right? So just talking about hirelings in D&D Basic. So as it is, if you play, many of you may play, and you may not really use experience points or the collection of treasure the reason you go into the dungeon is not just to kill the goblins, it's to get that loot. It's to get that treasure. That's the point. You're treasure hunters, right? You might be charged with, hey, there's a goblin problem. Anything you find in the cave, it's yours to keep. Or, hey, go clear out these goblins and we'll pay you 100 gold. Either way, you're going to achieve experience and you're going to achieve treasure, right? And the treasure may come from an obligation to a mission giver that says, I'm going to pay you to do this job, and you can keep everything you find, or you're exploring and your goal, of course, is to achieve the thing they're hoarding, the thing that they've collected, etc. And why, when we choose to play a game like D&D Basic Moldvay Expert, or again, I'm going to talk about those because those are the games that I grew up playing. They're the game that I think is a masterwork, and it is a masterwork in total, not hand waving away things you don't like, right? So for me, it's a masterwork. Tom Mulvey's a masterwork in total. Everything matters. Everything counts. It's all a cycle, right? If the molecules of D&D are the dice, if the molecules is that math formula, the dice, then we have these bonds, these chemical bonds. So first, you're going to randomly create a character. Then you're going to randomly roll up their gold. You're going to try to choose a class or a race that fits your attributes by rule, or be a thief because it doesn't have any prerequisites, so to speak, right? So you're going to try to meet the prerequisites and take something that you want to play and meet those prerequisites, or you're going to select the fighter class, which doesn't have any real prerequisite, whatever the case may be. And you're going to roll up that gold, and you're going to buy only what's available at the start of the game, right? We're not going shopping. When you create a character, you are allotted that opportunity to take that gold and to outfit your character. And there is no guarantee from there on you're going to do any shopping, and you're not going to have any extra gold until you begin the process of playing the game, until you begin the process of doing the loop, the thing that D&D is asking you to do. Become adventurers, go into a dungeon, slay the beast, get their treasure, bring it back, spend it to get experience, or use it for other means, more equipment, hiring someone to learning a spell, equipping your if you happen to have a stronghold, whatever case of base level gaming. But in ultimately, that's where you're going. That's all you're going to have to continue to secure items, things you're going to need to continue adventuring: food, water, arrows, right, torches, oil, right, things that you've used up, things that are going to get lost, things that get destroyed, things that you've abandoned by fleeing the combat, right? So, and then something like hirelings, right? We have charisma, tells us roughly how many retainers we can have. We can attempt to negotiate with them, but we must have gold, or we must be able to promise a contract. We will pay you 10% of all the treasure we find. And if you play the game and you're not using treasure, there is no way for the group of players to make those obligations, to make those deals. There is no way to pay for them. There is no way to actually make contracts with them. And if you never then proceed to the goal, which is we're going in there to kill these bastards, and whatever treasure's there, we're going to pay you their 10%, job done. And we never go into the dungeon, and we never actually try to deal with the goblins. We never actually find out what treasure we get from the goblins so we can pay off our hirelings, right? It is this, again, the molecules, the bonds, the chemistry, it's circular. There is a loop that the game is designed to be. Forget role playing. Role playing is something hopefully everybody wants to do because they're playing their elf, magic user / fighter, right? And they're embodying a personality to play with a group of friends, or maybe they're imbibing in a complete in character perspective, and that's their goal. But the reality is there is this game, there is this loop, there is a chemistry to Moldvay, right? And I'll pull up the book here and share screen just to show you what I'm talking about. For those who don't know, right? And all of you know, many of you know this, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but every OSR, every game that's come along that says, oh, I don't like this, I like that, they're connected dots. So if you're going to throw out, let's say, experience earned from killing and treasure, then you're going to have to redefine whether your players are ever going to be in a mathematical situation that they're ever going to need to hire hirelings. If they're not in that mathematical situation, you need to redo your math for the OSR, so you wouldn't need to hire hirelings to help you with the goblins or the dragons or the whatevers. So if you do that, then you got to change all the math. If you don't, then you still have to find a way to somehow incorporate the idea of a group of 4 2-level characters not having enough to finish off the orcs in the caverns, right? And you're doomed to always die, right? One reason the game is lethal: nobody pursues these avenues. Players aren't pursuing my charisma is, therefore I get, so it's all tied. So if the molecules of the game start with character creation and 6 attributes that many of us just go, well, those are just numbers on the sheet. Well, they're not. They're rules. They are part of those molecules that create bonds. So charisma, for instance, is a direct molecule that creates a bond to this thing called retainers, morale, hirelings. Well, we also need the treasurer to complete those chemical bonds. So if we just look at a game as a series of chemistry, of bonds and molecules, when you pull one loose, you're going to have broken chains, right? I have a 13 charisma. Reactions to wandering monsters. Reactions when I'm trying to negotiate is a +1. That's good, right? I can get a plus added to that 2D 6 roll to try to get a positive reaction from those I'm talking to or those I'm negotiating with. But hey, look at that. There's this thing called maximum number of retainers. By the way, notice it's not related to level. Nowhere here does it say you can't get retainers at level 1. The hell you can't. You can, but you're going to have to negotiate a deal, or you're going to have to pay them actual hard coins. So if I've got a 5, if I can get 5 retainers, right? It doesn't say you've got to be level 6 before you can begin to have retainers. It's unbelievable to me that D&D is so lethal because nobody is using this stuff, right? And it's still lethal, but you know what I mean, right? And then the morale of the retainers, right? So the morale of the retainers matters. I paid them, they've agreed, but the minute we're in combat and the minute they see 2 of their comrades die, we make a morale check to see if the rest of them flee, right? And now we've got another dilemma, right? These bonds, this is chemistry, these are molecules, and they make bonds. Charisma is a molecule for your character. Oddly enough, it's tied to 1 and 2 other things. Well, what are retainers? Well, that's going to tie a bond down here to what are retainers and how do you get retainers? What are hirelings? And how can you get hirelings? And so we look at all this and we say, not a lot of rules here, but they all are predicated on those chemical bonds, right? Every rule is reaching back. So when we look at encumbrance, why does this matter? People say, I hate encumbrance. Let's not use encumbrance, hand wave encumbrance. Well, then you're not honoring the economic system of basic D&D. Moldvay, again, I'm not talking about anything else. So for those of you who hate Moldvay basic D&D or you hate the old D20, then you should have tuned out a long time ago. So it matters, right? There's this math formula. How much can I carry? How much do I need to pay for this, to get this, exit this? If you leave out these pieces, it is a meaningless exercise. It becomes a vain exercise. It's no longer a game. There's no longer any reality in why we are adhering to any of this if we just disregard these rules, these things, right? We have to. Light, there's a reason rules are in here for light, because you need light to see and you need a torch to have light. Therefore, you got to check that torch to make sure you're not in the dark. And if you're in the dark, it's going to affect your hit rolls and what you can see and etc. Retainer reactions. So going back to that molecule, charisma, and its reference to other molecules or other the chemistry toward hirelings and retainers, we then come in here to reactions, which is part of the retainer chemistry, right? What does that mean? Level of retainers, loyalty, using retainers. This is remarkable to me. So on page B21, light, doors, and then look how much of B21 is all about retainers. The entire 2/3 of the page is dedicated to retainers. Experience. Retainers will earn experience from adventures just like player characters do. So it ain't just money they're getting from you. It's not just the 10% you promised them in gold or whatever the deal is you work out. They're also going to get some of your experience, which is going. So again, if a GM says, I don't like to let them get retainers because then it makes it too easy to kill all the goblins. Yeah, but the trade-off is I'm giving up my experience for that help. So I increase my longevity, but by taking help, I increase my opportunity to survive, but there's a risk reward. I'm also now have to give up a good portion of my experience to the same people who help me achieve the goal. And this becomes, again, I think it is so much a part of these old games and how they were constructed with a bedrock foundation, and everything grew and did tie back to the loop, back to why all of this matters. There aren't things you can just ignore and not expect it to affect and break down the entire chemical chain of what you're doing. Probably could make this argument about D100 RuneQuest, could probably make this argument about D&D 5th edition, right? There are probably some rules that appear to be irrelevant until we get to that moment in campaign or in play where, because we blew off, because we said we don't need experience points, we don't need treasure, all those other things later tied to directly to treasure are now no longer valid, and therefore half the game or a third of the game or a fifth of the game is broken, right? Anyway, so I just thought how important it is to understand the chemistry of a game, and in particular, one of the games, again, the game Reality was the game that I disregarded. I used my entire early in my career and harkened back to when I got OSRs when I came back to gaming. Some of those OSRs were following strictly an adherence to what they were trying to replicate. Some of them were hand waving away things they thought weren't good, right? Homebrew tweaks, so to speak. The irony is, when I look back, this is the game. This is the DNA bedrock foundation of what I like to do and what I'm about. But there is a game here first, right? There is this adherence to this thing we're trying to achieve that has all of these variables that make it a game. And for me, that can't truly be experienced or enjoyed if we're using 10% of the rules, right? 10% of the rules, right? It's just so important to me. And I know most people don't care, right? This falls on the deaf ears of all of my comrades. They do. We just want to play. We just want to roll. Of course, right? Yeah, socializing and enjoying the session with friends is always number one for me. It's always most important. But if we look at why they write a 65-page rule book, generally everything is tied to something else, right? Everything, the existence of hirelings is predicated upon the creation of your character, the adherence to experience points and treasure based on what you achieve in encounters with the things that you're going to meet in the world that are trying to kill you or that you are trying to stop from doing whatever they do. And if we don't adhere to those pieces, then the hirelings portion becomes completely irrelevant, or we begin to create rules as to, hey, I want to hire a couple of guys to go with me into that cave. And the GM has to invent a rule real quick. Well, let's make a charisma check. Just roll your charisma. If you get it, they'll agree to go. Completely ignoring the rules that exist, the foundational bedrock of what exists for how you actually hire and what it takes to hire them, right? It's a negotiation. It is, am I going to give you 10%? Am I going to pay you right now per day? If I have the gold, then I'll pay you something per day or the coppers per day. Or am I going to promise you 10% of everything we get? And of course, and do I have to make a retainer roll to maybe get the negotiative footprint I want? I fail the roll and the GM role plays back, the leader of the bandits. No, we want 20% of all gold taken. Oh, okay, I have to, I'll agree to that, right? Now we're role playing, right? This is what I want. Fail the retainer check. He could tell me, screw you. We're going to go do it ourselves. I didn't even know there were goblins there with treasure. We're going to kill you and go get, right? Because I failed and they're hostile. They decide to draw their weapons and say, we're going to get rid of you and we're going to go get rid of the goblins, right? Or we end up negotiating. Give us 20%, we'll go with you, right? Now we're in role play, right? And something is ignored as retainers or hirelings, etc. Something is what appears to be inessential is very essential, right? And I don't mean to just talk about hirelings. It's just it seems to be directly related to charisma and directly related to our chance of successfully achieving our goals when we are low-level characters, right? That or you just choose to never do a thing, or you choose to tiptoe around what might be dangerous, which is hard to decide when you're going into a dungeon. How do we know what's going to be dangerous around the next corner, right? And third, or we end up with a lot of dead characters as we continue to ram our head into the brick wall. That is a mathematical formula that is not going to work on behalf of 3 one-level characters, right? We have to tweak the math up. We do that by acquiring. And if we don't have enough gold to hire hirelings, retainers, then we make deals with them and we use charisma checks to satisfy those obligations, right? And then we have to, of course, out of the treasure, pay them their 10%. And then an entire section, part 7 on treasure. Why do I know this is the chemistry of D&D? Why do I know these are molecules that make bonds between one rule and another rule and another rule? Is we then have an entire part of the book. In a book that is only 68 pages long, we have part 7, treasure and treasure and treasure. And that goes on for I don't know how many pages here until we get down to part 8, dungeon master rules, right? That's pretty significant, right? How important is treasure? It's why we are playing the game. And much of the other pieces of the game are then further predicated upon treasure, experience points, as we continue to do this game's thing, the intent of D&D basic Moldvay, right? My intent as a player, roll up that random character, try to make sense of those numbers, pick the race and the class that I want to play, and outfit them the best way I can, and then I want to adventure. That's really the ultimate goal of me. But then I want that adventure and all of those variables that are going to exist within the framework of why I created a character to reflect back on the bonds, back on the chemistry. It needs to matter. Charisma matters, and it doesn't just matter for a roll under roll. It matters for other tables. It matters for retainers. It matters for negotiation. Right? Strength matters, right? It matters for whether we add a point to a damage, whether we add a point to hit, right? We don't do it with strength. If strength is 18, we get +3 damage, +3 to hit in melee. We don't ignore those chemical bonds. Strength is a molecule. The bond is between that and melee combat roll, right? So we get a bond, right? There's that chemistry. Strength is a molecule. It bonds itself to the melee rules, right? And it modifies those melee rules. And it strikes me, and I'm only getting into this because this is my favorite game of all time, and because I grew up not following almost all of this. When I came back, I got into Labyrinth Lord, and then I slowly, like I said, I ebbed away into something simpler like Basic Fantasy, which throws out much of this minutia in many ways, simplifies the game because somehow that is in the way of having the experience. No, if we want to have this experience, then you have to run these rules because this is the experience we're trying to have, whether you want it or not. If you don't want this experience, then play Basic Fantasy and get that experience. That experience will be what that is. And hopefully there isn't a break in these bonds, these chemical bonds, when, hey, we could hire some guys and this would help us beat the goblins. This is nuts. And then Basic Fantasy has no underpinning on how you retain hirelings. I'm pretty sure it does. But let's say it doesn't. The GM is having to fabricate rules on the fly, and they're not going to be consistent. And we're going to go, why? That's arbitrary, right? So we want that rule. There'll be players who never attempt to hire hirelings and don't want to deal with retainers, and it's a moot point, but they're probably not going to be successful in what they're attempting to do, right? So again, I see this first as a game, and we happen to role play in it. And there'll be people who say, not only is it a game, it's a war game that we're attempting to adventure in, and we're attempting to role play with. And I would say, yes, all of the additions of these other things make it more of an adventure game, less of just a war game, right? So anyway, it's amazing to me how I think we don't always read the rules looking for all of those bonds. We don't read the rules looking for the chemistry. We don't read the rules recognizing they are a whole experience. And we very often don't look at the rules as something that matter. And I think in the grand scheme of things, they do, which is why many people want to go simple. They want the simplest possible rules, right? And that's great too. Again, I've experienced that at the highest level by using a single page RPG, right? I've experienced some great role-playing sessions. So, but if I was going to break this out, this is what they're going to experience. Now that I'm an adult and I'm a grown man and I understand all of these things, they're going to get this game. They're not going to get my lazy, what I did from 10 years old to 18 years old, my lazy kind of half-assed understanding of D&D basic Moldvay, right? I read it. I loved it. I believe this was it. And then I would ultimately not follow most of these rules. So it's like, why did I care about this game when half of it I was like, it's like in my head, all of that stuff's happening, but then it never actually happened at the table as a rule. It's like the fact that it exists makes this game so thorough, but then I would ultimately not apply it. And therefore it might as well have not been in the book. And that's the thing that's changed for me in the last 8 years as I try to run games as written, and I try to run them with the intent that the authors want. Now, they may not even know when they write a rule book what their intent is. Well, I can't help that, right? I can't help that some authors don't know what the intent of their game is. But the rules will create a result that becomes their intent, whether that's what they wanted or not, right? The intent of D&D is people say, well, you're a murder hobo, you wonder all you do is kill, and you kill for experience, you kill for a goal. Well, that is the basic loop of this particular experience. But this loop can be so much bigger, right? We can expand that loop out to include all of those chemical bonds that make it deeper than that, right? Anyway, I know I'm wasting my breath probably here, but to give you an idea, like our game. So our game has a purse because we don't want you shopping and we don't want you negotiate. We want you negotiating. We want you making obligations, and we want it to be a simple prestige or purse check, right? So you get prestige. You can pretty much, let's say my prestige is 2. I can pretty much grab 2 soldiers and declare they're with me. But let's say we're going to need 5 more because we're heading off to get the dragon. Then that's a purse check. You're going to wander into the tavern and you're going to say, I need 5 more men to join us. We're going off to face the dragon, and we're going to negotiate with a purse check, and may or may not get 3, 4, 5 guys to join us. And purse becomes my ability to negotiate for those extra bodies. Or a fjord, I can say to the Lord, listen, we're going to go take on I need you to give me a writ that I am authorized to raise the militia, the fjord. And so the fjord is the militia, right? So you've got to give me the right to raise the militia, Lord, so we can go take on this dragon. You can't expect me and my buddy, the priest, and my buddy, the merchant, to take on the dragon. And that becomes a purse check with the Lord, right? That means the Lord's probably going to have to pay these militia out of his coffers. So we're going to make a purse check with the Lord against the Lord's DV rating, or against the difficulty value of convincing Lord Washburn that this is a worthy reason for us to call the militia, right? And then there's narratively any reason when that fails. Why? I don't have the funds in my coffers, gentlemen. Figure out another way to pay, and you're free to raise a fear, but you're going to pay for it. Or, oh my God, you can't raise the fear, gentlemen, because then my neighbors will think you're up to no. My neighbors will think we are aggressive toward them, right? So we would have to negotiate and raise a band outside of the Lord's authority, right? He would say no, but pursue what you need to pursue, but don't tie it to me, as I don't want my neighbors angry with me that there's a militia roaming the woods, right? These are why we designed our game the way we designed it. So we don't have to worry about experience and gold pieces. We use prestige and we use purse, and purse becomes the thing we can negotiate with blacksmiths for a sword, or the groom for a horse, or whatever, right? The sailor for the use of his boat, right? So if you want the experience to be more narrative and simple, then use a book, use a game system that calls out this minutia, right? And uses an actual apparatus that allows for straight negotiation, and your purse becomes the value that you use to convince, right? Or a promise of obligation. I can make the purse roll, but also promise them they're going to be paid handsomely upon the destruction of the dragon, right? And maybe that gives me a bonus in my lowers the DV to convince the peasants to join us to go after a dragon, right? That's Dark Age of Man versus this, right? And the chemistry of Dark Age of Man, the molecules and the chemistry, the bonds that make it Dark Age of Man, again, are a whole. They make a loop, a raw loop, that is self-contained into why Dark Age of Man is an experience different than this. What you see of four talking heads on a screen playing may not appear to be different, but the experience is indeed different. Regardless of what the actual play videos may look like, there is a difference experience happening if the rules are being used properly for all of these games, right? Anyway, I had to talk about it because this is the game that I cut my teeth on at 10. This is the game that inspired me my entire gaming life until I left gaming for 18 years, came back and started looking at OSRs that resembled this, and then have the experiences that reminded me that I really don't play this right, and I really have never played this right. And hey, there's an OSR that says I don't have to worry about range when they encounter the enemy. Let's make a die roll to see what the distance is to the target. I'm just going to play a game that doesn't bother to use distance from the target, right? And that's fine. But if we were playing D&D and I ignore range, distance from the target, there are going to be players at my table confused and angry. Dude, I'm in short range or am I long range? It matters to me with a short bow, right? Oh yeah, I guess this does matter, right? It becomes important information that gives the players that they anticipate when they read this game and they're going to play this game, that when we kill goblins, there's fucking treasure there, right? This goblin, we're going to check the treasure tables. How much treasure is in the pockets of these 6 goblins in this cavern? There's got to be something there, not only experience, but treasure. May not be enough to expand our career, but it's the beginning and it's part of the loop. It's part of the process. If you don't like that kind of gaming, then let's go Sword and Wizardry. Let's, do Sword and Wizardry Continual Light that doesn't have anything about hirelings, treasure, right? Sword and Wizardry Continual Light has none of those molecules making bonds to other rules, because that molecule, it defines itself and it's tied to something else, or it's not tied to anything at all, like hirelings or retainers. So there is no chemical bond between the other part of the rule, right? Sword and Wizardry Continual Light says this is the game. This is how you go about leveling up. This is how you go about adventure. It's nothing at all like D&D, right? Right. It resembles the old D20 D&D game barely, in the fact that it uses class and 3 dice 6 straight down and the same attributes and the same D20 against armor class. But aside from that, and some Vancian spell logic, etc., for how the game conducts itself. But outside of that, it is quite literally 4 pages of rules versus 68 pages of rules, and therefore that means we are hand waving out of the loop many of these bonds that make for a more sophisticated chemical apparatus. D&D Basic is not so basic compared to Sword and Wizardry Continual Light. But D&D Basic Expert is a little less sophisticated than Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right? So there's tiers, but D&D Basic is its own object, its own entity, its entire own device, and it is as a whole meant to be achieved or experienced with all of those bonds respected, right? And I'm not ranting. I guess I'm lecturing a little bit here because this is why I go rules as written with every experience I have now. Sometimes we play enough games we can get to every rule and people can experience every piece of a game. Simba Room, we pretty much experienced almost all of the bonds, the rules there. There are some things we just didn't get to experience, but for the most part, everyone experienced Simba Room in its intention. And I believe that out of all of our 14 or 15 sessions of shared GM role, we all got what Simba Room was. Dark Age of Man, there is no doubt, in our play tests and all the testing and playing we've had over the last 3 years, we have experienced Dark Age of Man, and we continue to experience Dark Age of Man. We just don't know what every variable of character direction is yet to be experienced. We don't know, how a group of 3 would go after the dragon, so to speak. But that's game detail. That's the actual session detail. We don't know how those things would go, in the sense that, but we know that the rules will support that loop, right? That chemistry. Anyway, thanks for listening. Everybody out there, have a wonderful, wonderful day. And think about this with whatever games you bought and whatever games you're running. When you make those changes, some other chemical bond is affected, right? Some molecules are left, out there non-connected. And at some point, if you don't recognize changing one rule has a ripple effect, that really adjusts the experience of what the intent of the game is. And I think that is important. Yeah. And as I age and I get where I want to play simpler games, or I get where I want to play a particular way, I still respect whatever game I go to, whatever table I go to, or whatever book I buy, and I intend to share to run it. My intent is to find out why that feels different than the thing I normally do, or why that's different than this, or why would I continue to play this if there's a whole piece of the rules that I can't reach to as a character. I can't go over there and say, oh, there's an entire process of rules here that helps me achieve my goal, right? And if we just ignore it or forget it or hand wave it or change it, I am as a player in a vacuum in which I don't know what I can do to actually impact the attempts at success. And I don't mean rolling dice success. I mean it's succeeding at eradicating the orcs from the old fort, right? Because when you look at the math, you go, why would I, with 2 other guys, go into a fort to face 14 or 40 orcs? You're not. You're not going to win that in any way, shape, or form, right? Without an army, or without some serious weaponry, or without, a larger party of 8, party members, right? And there you have it. So, all right, I think this is true. Again, when you read 5th edition as a player's handbook, it's only referring to the things the players really need to know. When you look at that DM's guide, you start seeing all the other things and all the other rules that are paramount to the intent and to what all the other pieces of that system should be applied so the players have the complete experience, right? If the player's handbook's all you look at, if the player's handbook's all that you think matters for your rules, then you are doing a disservice to the D&D 5th edition experience.